to achieve to do games like System Shock 2 or Thief or the Underworld game that we're working on now. But if it was done in a traditional retail publisher model with $50 million budget, it would be a lot scarier for who's ever funded.
Yeah, I will say as well, like what you can know, just in case that terrified Chris, is you can know what your objectives are aesthetically, what your objectives are, and you can know what your process of discovery is, right? You do go into the project with some very definite plans. What they are not is a specific description of exactly what the player's experience is going to be. But as a developer, you know what your process is.
And I'll point out that between Blue Sky and Looking Glass, it's essentially the same studio. We changed our name. It went for 10 years, which is pretty long in the games industry. We did a lot of games, and every game that we put into production, we completed, unless the publisher said, we don't want to see this game get released. It was never, even though we took some real creative risks, it never stopped us from delivering on the games we were building. So it's a different thing to say you're taking creative risks where you don't know how the game experience will come out, to taking the kind of risk where you're saying we don't even know how to make this, sort of the technical risks. We always stayed within those bounds. We knew what was possible. We knew where we could stretch. This is really just goes to the gameplay and the experience aspect of it, which is vital. But it didn't slow us down from making games.
The one thing I thought I would chime in with on that sense of sort of the cautious and the way in which and the very conservative way that publishers like to behave, as someone who worked in television for as long as he did, I think in a lot of creative industries, that sense of caution and like let's just do what we know works is kind of endemic. I don't think it's entirely healthy. But that I think there's sometimes a temptation, and this is for more the benefit of the audience, to think that there's something, unique about the game industry in that facet. But it is something I think we definitely see in television that we also see in cinema as well. So going back to Underworld Ascendant, what are sort of like what are the core elements that maybe we haven't talked about? We know the one big one of player authorship. But what are those core elements of that franchise or of that type of game that Looking Glass really helped develop that you feel is essential to bring over into the new title?
Well, one is that it's a role-playing game, genuine role-playing game. So you're developing your own character. So contrast that with Thief, where you were given Garrett as a character that you played and had his own personality, his own skills. You didn't have much authorship over that character. In Underworld Ascendant, it's a genuine role-playing game where you get to pick what kind of character you want. You develop that character through an arc. It changes quite a bit, becomes uniquely your character. And any 100 players could have 100 very different characters that each one to have. So that's a real distinction in that style of gameplay. One thing we're trying to innovate on with Underworld Ascendant is to take the kind of immersive sandbox gameplay that you see here in System Shock 2, and then marry that in a more tighter way with the role-playing sensibility. So rather than being this hacker character who's kind of predefined, and yes, you can learn certain skills, give you much more authorship over the character you're playing. And that will open up new kinds of experiences. If you think of Thief, you're always a thief. You're using stealth. Yeah, you could sword fight, but you weren't very good at it. I mean, it was basically all about stealth. And so that was your narrow band of experience. Now, we did that extremely well, I think, and it was great for what it was. In Underworld Ascendant, you could be a thiefly-like character if you wanted to and rely on stealth, or a fighter type, or a mage type, or some hybrid. And each choice you'd end up having a different experience on the game, quite a bit different than another character.
Is there a chance, and this is a phrase I believe I got from the author Paul Bowles, that you could have too much choice? I think the phrase he used was the tyranny of choice, that do you guys have a sense that if you offer too much, especially maybe too much too early to the player, that they have no idea, that they can't inform themselves about how to make those decisions? Is there a natural tension in designing these games about wanting to have a lot of options to the player, but there is a limit where it becomes more than helpful, I guess?
Sure, and I think that was a lesson we learned from the original System Shock in particular, because that was the provided an unbelievable degree of choice right up front with very little direction, and I think that was intimidating to a lot of players. Um, I read somewhere about at a store, if you go into a grocery store, that they work on how many choices you have. That if you have too many choices, it feels overwhelming. You don't buy anything. If there's 27 different kinds of ketchup, you're like, well, I don't know what the best one is. All right, forget this. Too few choices, and people feel like I don't have enough choices. I want more options here, and so I think there's a human nature factor of how many choices there are. But the interesting thing is that depends on how much you're into any particular thing. If you're really a aficionado of different ketchups, and you've tasted a lot of kinds, you're probably looking for more choices than someone who's I don't know, just give me the regular brand, the house brand. Same thing would apply to wines or craft beers or games. So I think we are making, as within the System Shocks, with Underworld Ascendant, this is for core gamers. This is not a casual game, and so core gamers are probably played a bunch of games and first-person games, and they already have a sense of what they like. So they're not coming in they don't want something simplistic. They want sufficient choice. So we have more latitude there, and that's a good thing. The other aspect is it's a matter of introducing choice over the course of the game. So you don't want to overwhelm people early on. That's accessibility to do that well. But 5 hours into the game, 20 hours into the game, there better be a lot more choices have opened up to you, or you're going to get bored. And so that, progressing the choices, opening up choices, particularly if it's player driven, we like to do things where the player's making the choice about how fast to progress, what kind of risks to take. So if a player is very confident and they're a really good gamer and they play games like System Shock 2, my guess is they progress faster, and we allow them to do that.
I would also add that the role-playing genre is particularly good at doing this, in that I find that if the introduction of a new option to the player comes in the form of a new ability that they have gained, they are at that moment heavily invested in learning how to use it. So it's a very natural fit.
Like if you start to see locked doors that you can't get access to, you now know to build yourself a goal. Like, okay, I want to play this game and build up that particular skill. On the topic of choice, I think when you're using your ketchup analogy in the grocery store, you use the term best, and I think that must be another tricky thing for you guys to have to deal with, is to condition the player. It's like there isn't a best. Everything is a valid, useful, and interesting option, and you don't need to try to sort of second guess the system we put in place. And how? Because that's something that you do need to start to instill in the player from very early on. And how do you get them to just kind of go with their own flow and not try to question themselves?
Yeah, and speaking of locked doors, you may want to lock yours from the background there.
Yeah, sorry about all the sirens there. I happen to live right in the middle of a city that has a hospital very nearby and a large thoroughfare, so apologies, guys.
Yeah, no, it's a great question in terms of, when you give players choice, is it there in their heads? Are they thinking, I made a bad choice? I made the right choice? Again, our sensibilities from Looking Glass and today is to try to not be the judge of that. We as game designers, we're not really out there to say, hey, player, choose A or you're going to be a stupid player. We give you the options, and then it's up to you to determine whether that worked well for you. And we try to design the game systems that way too, where it's not a black and white. Where, yeah, I mean, there's certain advantages for any choice and certain disadvantages, but it's rarely a black and white. That's always better, that's always worse. And I think, but it is challenging if you're a player and you're used to having a lot of guidance, a game that's sort of more on rails and more, the game designers have figured out here's how we want the player to solve this particular encounter. When you become accustomed to that, then suddenly when you don't have those training wheels on, it can become disoriented in that way because you're waiting for the game to telegraph to you, did I do the right thing? And the lack of that telegraphing for players can be disoriented, and it's tough to design that. So I think part of that is similar to what Tim was saying about a role-playing games. You can early on not expose the player to a ton of choices in rapid fire. You can kind of educate them progressively to say, okay, here's a choice, and then you can try to reinforce you had A or B, and either of them were completely valid. And I think once players get into that, become accustomed to that, and players new to this sort of approach, the hope is that they'll get more comfortable as they go and like it, hopefully.
Yeah, and this is also, I would say, an advantage of some of the recent developments in the terrain of publishing and the what's available to us in the crowdfunding model. When the original Underworld and when System Shock came out, we had the back of the box to communicate to players what kind of game they were even looking at. And here we have the whole Kickstarter campaign, and then with that process, building up a community of people, and over the process of the entire development of the game, getting our message across about what kind of game to expect.
Hey guys, can I begin with our next key winners?
Yes, please, by all means.
Great. Our next winners, compliments of Night Dive Studios, are Sonata Fanatica and Carwelas. Thank you.
All right, guys, that was Sarah Gerard. She's she runs community for OtherSide Games, who just announced 2 more winners. I have to apologize. I did not note down those 2 names as quickly as they were said. But to both of you, congratulations. You have won a Steam code for System Shock 2, which is the game that we are currently looking at on this stream. And with that, I think we'll take another opportunity to just remind anyone who may have just joined us. My name is Adam Sessler. I'm here really enjoying this this talk with 3 gentlemen from OtherSide Games. These are a collection of people that have come out of the famed Looking Glass studio that is obviously responsible for the game we're looking at, System Shock 2, System Shock Ultima Underworld. And this is all happening on behalf of the Kickstarter that they are engaging in right now to help make the game Underworld Ascended, which is a return to the style of game, the sandbox, play as you will, player authorship experience that was started with the Ultima Underworld series. And that was back in 1993. Is that correct, Paul?
The original System Shock was released in 1994.
But with the original Ultima.
1992.
1992. All right. I remember where I was watching people play it when I was in college, but I should have taken 1 year off of the age I granted myself. On that note,
What's a year, give or take, when it's 24 years ago?
I was about to say it was all youth. Nowadays, that's all it is to me. When that game came out, there really wasn't much in the way of precedent. We did have sprawling RPGs, but definitely not one that was being played from a first-person perspective in a 3D environment. What was the reaction and the reception at the time?
Well, it was a brand new experience. I mean, our studio was the first to bring 3D texture mapping to games to create that immersive experience. That there weren't games that did that before then. And combining that with taking a role-playing game and all the narrative and storytelling and developing a character with a first-person 3D immersion was pretty crazy. So we had some very interesting reactions. We had people who just sort of, jaws would drop and they would just stare at the thing and had never seen anything like it, which was pretty cool. The larger experience was, the interesting thing about Ultima Underworld is that the game came out in 1992. The first 6 months a year, it actually didn't sell very well. But it started to pick up steam, and 3 or 4 years later, it had sold over 500,000 copies, which for a PC game in the 90s was actually pretty darn good. It's continued to sell well. Between the two, it's over 1 million units copies have sold. So it took a while